Hi, my name's Dan Keane. I'm a composer, producer and musician based in London. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Slight change of scenery today. We're in the spare bedroom of my flat here in London. The reason for which is I'm self-isolating after coming into contact with someone who tested positive for COVID-19, and I just want to do my bit, I just want to self-isolate for a few days. I've got a PCR test coming. Hopefully all will be fine. I'm sure it will. Now, even though I don't have my cameras on me and I don't have nice DSLRs, I've literally just got my iPhone. I've got this microphone, and I have a feeling that's going to really increase the sort of production quality of this video. And I guess it proves that you can iterate your point without having the best equipment necessarily. So I was thinking about videos that I could make, and one easy one is a Q&A. So I reached out to you on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and I've got a set of questions on my computer which we're going to go through. The first question is about my Mac Mini. For those of you who don't know, about a year ago, I bought the 2020, although really it was the 2018 Mac Mini 6-core i7 processor, 64 gigabytes of RAM. I've had it for the last year. What are my thoughts on it? This is the Intel version. My thoughts so far are that it's still an excellent workhorse. And to be honest, while the M1 came out just after I bought my Mac Mini, the thing that I said last year and the thing that I still iterate now is it's just not reliable yet. It might work great in Rosetta and it might have fantastic emulating capabilities. In fact, some companies might have already kind of sorted out their compatibility issues. But as I said last year, this is going to take a good 2 years. I think we're only about 1 year into this cycle. And although I've got lots of friends who have got the M1 machines, they are not the only machines they own. In fact, if they had one machine, they'd probably all say that they would have an Intel. So whether I recommend that you buy one, it's a really difficult one, because I think in a couple of months, we're going to see the introduction of a new Mac Mini Pro. And I think that will be the machine to have. 16 gigabytes of unified memory sounds okay, but actually we need more RAM for us kind of orchestral programmers who are using really big sample libraries in huge projects with hundreds of tracks. I just don't know how that translates. My current kind of impressions is that I love the Mac Mini, but I wouldn't recommend the M1 just yet. Got a few questions here about my work with Spitfire Audio, how I balance it alongside my other projects, and how I got the job in the first place. I've realised I've never actually spoken about this, but I've got the time today. I started working with them in a kind of part-time capacity from, I think it was February or maybe March of this year, 2021. I have been kind of on Spitfire's radar since I started making videos and instruments for Piano Book. Within a few months, I was asked by Oliver Vader from Spitfire, to compose a demo for a couple of their libraries. The first video I did for them was with the BBC Symphony Orchestra library, just how to write a piece of music in the style of a kind of film noir type thing. I then also made a video about writing in the style of Edward Scissorhands. And again, this was a complete kind of freelance thing. And then there was a little transition just before I started where they needed playthroughs created for them. I started filming them, and eventually it led to a job offer, which was like, can you come here and work for us as an in-house composer? So having worked there now for the last kind of 3 or 4 months, I work there part-time, but as a fully fledged member of the team, and I absolutely love it. I think something that's really great about Spitfire is that they encourage people to have other work outside of just composing for Spitfire, because it also adds credibility to them as a composer. If you're just the person who writes demos, that doesn't necessarily show you off in the best light to be a great composer. You might be great at writing the demos, but it adds more credibility if you're also active in the film or music industry outside of that. So it bodes well that you have other things going on, and that particularly works well for me because Spitfire is just one pie I have my fingers in here in the music industry. Got another question here. How is your work at Abbey Road with Gary Barlow? This is something else I haven't really talked about here on the channel because I just don't really need to. I guess I haven't worked on a project with him to its completion yet. So even though there are loads of things I'd love to talk about, and I've worked on quite a lot of projects with Gary now, it's just, there's nothing for me to say yet because it's still in this kind of embargo stage. What I will say though is that Abbey Road session was absolutely amazing. It was my first time at Abbey Road. It was my parts that I had written for some work that I was doing with Gary, and it was my first time conducting an orchestra at Abbey Road as well. So I was kind of there on the podium, a little bit shaky, just listening to these arrangements that I'd only heard in my sample libraries, and it was just incredible. Such a whirlwind of a day, so exciting, and yeah, I hope I never lose that excited spark. I was wondering if you've ever had an assistant composer or if you currently need someone. Interestingly, I was sent an email recently by someone asking if I needed a composer's assistant, and to be honest, I'm not really at that stage in my career yet. I don't necessarily know what I would get a composer's assistant to do, because I already feel like I'm a composer's assistant in that I'm still coming up through the ranks. It doesn't feel right that I should be at a point yet to employ someone else to help me with my workload, although I could use the help, I guess. The thing that I would look for in an assistant, I guess, is someone who can also help me with the YouTube side of things, because the social media and editing is something that I don't care enough for, but I know it's really important. And that's something that I often run out of time to do. So I guess someone who's able to help me with a little bit of orchestration, perhaps, not because I don't enjoy doing it, I guess, but just it's so time consuming. I'm not yet at the stage of knowing what a composer's assistant would be really useful for me. But I think someone who can handle the slightly more administrative side of composing and orchestration, and also the kind of social media influencer side of things as well. That would be really cool. Favourite composing tools: pencil, pen, paper or software, at the instrument versus away from it? It's a good question. I always thought that really well-known composers and songwriters would spend most of their time recording their demos at a piano and would then go into their DAW afterwards and kind of play the parts in. However, I found that while many of these people have keyboards and pianos, even grand pianos in their studios, many don't actually use them to mock up their initial demos, which is quite interesting. And I think the reason why is because you need to have access to all of the MIDI information there and then. You can record it to a click, you can change the tempo afterwards, you can modulate it into a different key. You've already set out the MIDI there if you want to add other parts later. And I've kind of fallen into this world as well. In fact, I was recording piano recently, and it was the first time playing a real piano for quite a while, because I spend so much time sitting at a keyboard. When it comes to orchestrating and writing parts on paper, that's not really how I tend to work to begin with, just because I find the writing of it down too slow for me. I need to be able to get the ideas out straight away. So often I'll improvise at the piano or at a keyboard and record either on a voice memo or recording straight into Logic. And that seems to be the best way for me. When it comes to orchestrating parts, I use Dorico to do all of my notation, and although I will have already created most of the parts in Logic in the way of kind of mock-ups, when I go into the orchestration phase, and the reason I'm still quite protective over orchestration is because that's the moment that I can see it on a page, I can add other little layers if I want to, I can be really expressive with the use of techniques, and I would say that is the thing that kind of makes my music come alive at that point. So a mixture of all things, not really pencil, mainly software. I'm sure you get asked a lot about your setup. It's really impressive and I would love to have something similar, but I don't know where to start. Any pointers would be grand. The thing is, I think a lot of people think that their barriers to entry are that they don't have enough gear. They see these amazing studio tours and think, oh God, I'm going to have to buy all of these things. But it's the culmination of decades of little small additions here and there. And ultimately, once someone has a setup that they're happy with, the reason they're happy with it is not because all the gear is great, it's because they know it and they trust it and they know how it will translate to the outside world. A case in point for me, I've had this pair of KRK Rocket 5 speakers for years, about 10 years now. They're not the best speakers in the world. Their low end is pretty laughable. However, I really know them. I really like how they sound because I'm familiar. I've listened to music on them. So I would recommend, before you get hung up on gear, just buy what you can afford, do a bit of research, but then actually practice making a piece from start to finish, and then set it off, put it on SoundCloud or something like that. Just practice. Keep practicing and don't use this lack of equipment as your reason not to get started. Do you have any advice on mixing scores to dialogue and sound effects? Good question. I would always recommend mixing your scores in mono first. The reason being that people often use stereo imaging as a way to manage their mixes. Oh, I can hear that if I put it at 40 to the right, this is going to give me some kind of bit of clearance in the stereo image. The fact is, once you move out of the way of the stereo image, you're already hearing it in mono anyway, a summed mono mix. So especially when working with dialogue and sound effects, if everything can sound good straight up the middle where dialogue and sound effects usually are as well, I think you're going to be in a really, really good position to switch to stereo. If it sounds great in mono, it's going to sound impeccable in stereo. The other thing I'd recommend is always keep your dialogue and sound effects at the top of the volume. Often I find that people write pieces of music without the dialogue or without sound effects, and it's like writing an arrangement without the lead vocal. Sometimes you need to hear what people are gravitating towards in order to understand what needs to be put in elsewhere in the mix. If you only had one microphone, what would it be? This is an interesting question. I recently took delivery of a new Townsend Labs L22 Sphere microphone, which can emulate lots of other microphones. If I were to have one microphone, I guess that would be great because I could emulate lots of others. But if I had to choose just one microphone, I'm not really sure. Maybe a Neumann U87 or something. I know it's not that original, but they just sound great. What's your favourite woodwind instrument and why? Now, this was asked by my friend who's a bass clarinetist. I'm calling you out, Hannah. I would say bass clarinet is probably my favourite, mainly because we've worked together before and I'm very familiar with its sound, but also it's so versatile. I would say it's the cello of the woodwind roster. It's got such a wide range, multiphonics sound great on it, and it sounds epic when layered in with an electric bass as a kind of funky, really, really cool underlayer. I wondered if you have any advice for marketing oneself and networking as a creative. Well, for me, there is a parallel universe where I didn't create a YouTube channel in January 2020 and start uploading. And in that world, I didn't make instruments for Piano Book. I didn't get spotted by Christian. I didn't start working for Spitfire. I didn't start working with Gary on his projects. I can honestly say that every opportunity that has come to me has come because I decided to put myself out there online. Now, that isn't to say that I wasn't incredibly lucky. I know I was. But that isn't also to say that the luck came to me without knowing that it was going to come to me. You have to create opportunities to put yourself out there. I believe that there are plenty of really gifted geniuses who will never ever be spotted because they didn't market their skills properly. And it's really sad when that happens, but it's part of the business. You are your own business, unfortunately. And if you don't care enough about that, then fine. But you have to put yourself out there somehow in order to gain these opportunities, to be seen beyond your village, as I've said before. So for me, I haven't had a huge amount of success on other social media platforms, but YouTube is definitely the place where I have found a sense of community. It means you've got to be willing to talk in front of a camera. It means you've got to be willing to say potentially controversial things. And it means you've got to be willing to be offended by other people disagreeing with you. However, I don't think any of that matters because the opportunities that you could gain as a result are incredible, and that is the thing that kind of kickstarts your career. So I don't really have much advice in terms of growing an audience here on YouTube. Post once a week. I mean, that seems to be paramount. Keep creating content that you think is interesting so that people like you would want to watch it. The other thing I'd recommend is not to rely on metrics that aren't in your control. I've just crossed 10,000 subscribers and I'm very grateful for that, but I wouldn't want my dopamine hit to be caused by something that I cannot control. I would rather know that I'm creating good content and that I'm putting good stuff out there and that people will find it if they want to find it or not if they don't, but that I feel fulfilled by the content that I'm making. And this is something that I kind of struggle with sometimes on YouTube because there is this search engine optimization versus authenticity versus what you actually want to be posting. I would just say, try and keep your head up, keep posting, as Rick Beato says, and you may also find a community of people who love the same stuff that you love. I think I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for submitting your questions. It's been really fun to share some of my insights with you. If your question wasn't answered today, fret not, because I'm actually going to make some more videos about some of these topics. People have asked really interesting questions that don't seem worthy of just a quick answer in a Q&A. So I hope to get back to your questions shortly. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't done already. Click like if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again very, very soon. Goodbye.